Hello, my name's Grace, and I know we're about a week into February now as I'm filming this, but I wanted to make a video about all the books that I read in January, because I read 6 books, which is kind of a lot for me. I usually average like less than a book a week, so like 3 books a month, so 6 is a lot, and I thought, let's talk about them. So here they are. The first book I read for this whole year was Acts of Service by Lillian Fishman. This is about a bisexual woman named Eve, and she was pursuing women at the time, and she ended up getting entangled with a couple instead. Their names are Nathan and Olivia. Nathan is Olivia's boss as well as her boyfriend, and the two of them work at a big investment firm. Eve feels very conflicted about whether or not Nathan and Olivia's relationship is actually consensual, acceptable, ethical, any of those words. I thought that the whole book presented very interesting ideas about power dynamics and sexuality and gender. However, the story kind of conflicted with those ideas. Eve was very much opposed to Nathan and Olivia's relationship, and she thought that it was very manipulative what was going on there, but she did continue to see them, which kind of negated all of her thoughts and musings about whether or not something like that can be acceptable. I'd be interested in reading Fishman's thoughts on power and queerness and all of those topics in more of a nonfiction book, just because I thought that the plot in this one conflicted so much with the ideas that they kind of lost their weight. After that, I read The New Me by Halle Butler. I read this because I read Jillian by Halle Butler at the end of last year and I really liked it, but The New Me was different from Jillian in ways that I didn't really love. It's about Millie, who works as a temp, and it mainly talks about her experience temping in the office of like a big furniture store. Millie can't seem to do anything right. She's terrible at all of her jobs. She struggles a lot with taking care of herself, and she has very limited and strange social connections. I liked that the book gave representation to girls who can't seem to get anything right, but I thought that the plot really droned on. Millie spirals like on and off throughout the book, but most of the plot is just her getting up and going to work every day and then coming home to her dirty apartment, and that kind of just got repetitive after a while. I did appreciate that this book had a much stronger conclusion than Jillian did. I think it may have actually been an epilogue, but we got like a very solid answer of what happens to Millie, whereas the characters in Jillian just like fall off the face of the earth. So I liked that aspect of this book. Next, I read Nightshift by Kiare Ladner. I read this because a friend of mine mailed it to me all the way across the country and said that I should read it, so I got to it right away. It's told from Maggie's perspective, and it talks about her obsession with her coworker, Sabine. Maggie is completely and utterly obsessed with her. She wants to be just like her, and she doesn't care if it upends her life in the process. And she's so obsessed that she starts to question her sexuality because she thought that she was straight so far until Sabine enters her life, and Sabine is not straight. I liked that this presented like the dilemma for queer women of, do I want to be her or do I want to be with her? And the book was very intense throughout. I also liked that it was set in London, but it talked a lot about the fact that Maggie is from South Africa and Sabine is from Belgium, and how there was a lot of questioning of whether or not the obsession is partially due to cultural differences and how both of them live outside of the original context that they were raised in. Overall, I did really enjoy reading this. I wouldn't say it was a favorite for me, but it was a good book. Then I read You Again by Kate Goldbeck. This book is advertised as a retelling of the movie When Harry Met Sally, and I haven't seen the movie in a few years, but like just off the top, I expected this book to have a lot more in common with the movie than it actually did. Not that that's bad, just that I was confused for like the first half, because I kept being like, when is it going to get more like When Harry Met Sally? And it just never really did. It just shares like a general concept, but that's pretty much it. I think this might be the first traditional, like straight up romance that I've ever read all the way through. Usually I can't get very far in them, so I would say that's a good sign. It's about Ari, who's a comedian, and Josh, who's a chef, and you see them kind of connect and fall out of touch many times over the years. It's set in New York. That's one of the things that it shares with When Harry Met Sally. I did like the book, but I thought it was way too long. It's over 400 pages, and I honestly just feel like so much of it could have been cut out. There were plenty of scenes that just did not need to be in there if the book was going to be that long. I feel like this story really only needed 250 pages, maybe 300, definitely not over 400. Also, if you're one of those people who doesn't like to read books about fictional comedians unless they're really funny, I will warn you, Ari is not particularly funny. If anything, she's funny in like a millennial way, like a cute little sarcastic girl who says things that you wouldn't expect her to say, so probably not funny to most people. It doesn't ruin the book, but I know that some people are very particular about their fictional comedians, so I wouldn't say that Ari is like knee-slapping funny or anything like that. After that, I read Set My Heart on Fire by Izumi Suzuki. I actually do have a copy of that one. I think that's the only book I read in January that I have a physical copy of, but here it is. I really, really loved this. I'm so glad that I found it. I was visiting my sister in Minnesota, and we went to a book fair, and the cover caught my eye. I just thought it was so beautiful, so I bought it. It's translated from Japanese, and when I went to review it on Goodreads, I was surprised that it has less than 500 ratings. And so I was like, oh, maybe it's just not that popular, because it is kind of a niche topic, which I'll get into. But then I realized it was actually just translated into English. So if this synopsis that I'm going to get into sounds interesting, definitely pick it up. I want to spread the word about this. It was amazing. It's labeled as fiction, but the main character is named after the author, and it is set within her lifetime. So I imagine that some of it, maybe not all of it, is based on her real life experiences. And it's about the rock scene of Japan in the 70s. The main character, Izumi, loves going to concerts at clubs. She loves sleeping with the bands. She loves drugs. Her closest friend is actually a music journalist, so they go to a lot of these concerts together and then get to spend time backstage with the bands afterwards. I really enjoy books about the classic rock scene, but if you're also into them, then you'll know what I mean when I say that they can get a little bit pretentious sometimes, but this book was not like that at all. Izumi wasn't even really that into the music. She was more into the partying and kind of like enjoying the music rather than analyzing its merit or name-dropping really important bands or anything like that that you might see in other books about classic rock. I found the book to be very insightful and honest and transparent. It does get somewhat depressing, and unfortunately Suzuki, the author, not the character, took her own life in her 30s. Supposedly her writing is fairly well known in Japan because she did really pioneering work in science fiction. I hadn't heard of her before, and I don't really like science fiction, but I enjoyed this book so much that I might pick up some of her other works just to give them a try. This book also inspired me a lot to broaden my music taste. I'm pretty narrow-minded and just listening to classic rock, and I don't know a ton about modern music, even though I try. But I didn't know a lot of the bands that she mentioned because they were mainly Japanese bands, so I'm definitely interested in listening to some of them and seeing if I like it and how similar or different they might be to the classic rock bands that I know of already. The last book that I read in January was Good Material by Dolly Alderton. This was another book about a comedian in a relationship. It's about Andy, who is a struggling comedian whose long-term girlfriend just ended things with him. This book was recommended to me by a few different people who were all like, oh, it's so interesting to read about the male perspective of what happens like after a breakup and how they process it, which, like, sure, but this was written by a woman, so I don't know how accurate that portrayal is. Like, I wouldn't recommend it to somebody based on that fact. And I'd be interested to hear if men have read it, if they do think that's an accurate representation for their perspective. As for the metric of whether or not Andy is a funny fictional comedian or not, I don't think he's very funny, but I do think that that's kind of the point. His career is tanking throughout the book, so it makes sense that a lot of his stand-up that he talks about doesn't seem funny because he's failing, so it's accurate. I did really enjoy this book. I thought it was very heartfelt and creative, and slight spoiler, but at the very end, you get like 20 to 30 pages from his ex-girlfriend's perspective about why she broke up with Andy and how she handled the breakup, and I did really like that. I thought it was a great ending, and it provided the perfect amount of closure for the two of them and the book. That's every book that I read in January. Let me know what you're reading right now, or if you've read any of these books and you have thoughts on them. I'd love to know. Bye!